everyone. Great to see some faces I haven't seen in a while. Alice, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Nice.
Yeah. All of you, this is Ross Lockhart.
Morning.
Dean of St. Andrews Hall, faculty at Vancouver School of Theology, involved in a lot of mission avenues through Washington State and D.C. And a friend of mine the other day was saying, has now taken on the role of synod staff in every synod of the country. And in his spare time, he lives on Bowen Island. With his family and his gorgeous dog.
Yay, thank you. I love my dog so much. And my family. I love my family.
So, welcome, Ross.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for coming out and spending some time on a Saturday. I was just saying to others earlier, you live in such a beautiful place. I was looking at the snow and the mountains this morning, and we are so blessed to be where we are. And so I hope today is fun. I hope it's a good time of learning. The theme is discipleship. Ina asked me to kind of speak on discipleship. So we're going to spend the morning kind of looking at the changing nature of discipleship in our Canadian society. And then this afternoon I'm going to present some research that I've published on Christianity here in the Pacific Northwest, and we'll have a look at that and have some discussion. We'll have lots of time where you kind of turn to someone beside you and check in with a couple of questions. So if you don't like who you're seated beside, this is a good time to change your seat. But maybe do so discreetly so you don't hurt their feelings, right? That's good. Yeah. You're all good. You're all good. And thanks for having me back. It's always good to be in Salmon Arm, and looking forward to worship again tomorrow. So as Ina kindly said, I'm at St. Andrews Hall, which is the Presbyterian Church in Canada College at the University of British Columbia. If my slides will work, maybe my clicker isn't working. Let me see if I just try that. Okay. And so when I say St. Andrews Hall, this is where I hang my hat, and we're home to about 250 students studying anything and everything at UBC. Yes, we have some theology students under our roof, but we have every other kind of student: education, law, engineering, philosophy, all that kind of stuff. And our students choose to live with us. They could live in any UBC residence, but they choose to live with us because we're a Christian residence. And so we have weekly worship, Wednesday soup night and Bible study that follows, Thursday evening worship, Tuesday lunch worship. We're home to addictions recovery groups on campus. And what I kind of like about St. Andrews Hall, as you can see from the pictures, oftentimes if you think of a student residence, you think of maybe everyone of a certain age, but we're all different ages. The wing where my office is in is the undergraduate wing, so mostly younger students. But then we have 30 townhomes as well. And so we have kids, we have families that stay with us. I think we're probably the only Presbyterian college I know of that has our own playground, which is kind of cool. So the kids get to play and hang out. And this is pictures from our Welcome Back barbecue. Last year we celebrated 70 years. We're the youngest of the 3 Presbyterian colleges. We have Knox College at the University of Toronto and Presbyterian College Montreal at McGill. And we're the youngest, founded in 1955. So we had a big gala dinner at UBC that was tons of fun. We had a great time. One of the 2 ministries that we have, our first ministry is the campus ministry. We have a wonderful chaplain, Sumarmi Gobel, who looks after all the residents and represents all of us as Presbyterians on the UBC campus through the chaplaincy. But then our outreach ministry is the Center for Missional Leadership. And so I have a team that I work with, and we go out and we resource congregations. We have conferences. There's one coming up next week online, focused on the theme of Lent. So some in person, some online, and various programs that we offer, including a certificate program for congregations. This year we have 17 congregations, coast to coast, participating, so about 120 people participating in the certificate program. And this is the team that I get to work with. So Mark Glanville is a professional jazz pianist. He's a wonderful guy, PhD in Old Testament, and he's an Australian Presbyterian, so he has a great accent. Amanda Nina is our communications and program director. Tim Dickow was a pastor in East Vancouver for 30 years. In early retirement, he's come to hang out with us and run some of our programs. And then myself as dean, and then Reverend Rebecca Simpson is our assistant dean. So we work together in management and help resource the team. We've produced a number of different books over the years, trying to help congregations just like this one figure out how do we live faithfully as disciples in contemporary Canada. So that's just a little background. Some of you know some of that before, but just to kind of locate who am I and where do I come from. Now I'd like to know a little bit more about you. And so we're going to invite you to answer briefly these questions. We'll go around. And if you could offer your name. Who lives under your roof is my way of asking about home life because it is varied. So if, for example, you live on your own, maybe you want to talk about a pet that you have. I've even had people name their house plants before. So maybe, whatever you want to. And then I always find it interesting to ask something like, if you could sing on stage with any famous singer, who would it be and what song would you sing? So think about like a famous singer you really like, and if you were invited up on stage, what song would you sing with them? Okay, so I'll give you a moment to think about that. And then maybe we'll start at the back and put Ina on the spot, and she can model for us these 3 questions.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to poorly let you down.
Never.
Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ina. I live alone in an apartment building with some people that I really, really like, and some people who we don't like all that much.
That sounds like an apartment.
Building,
Yes.
Right? And I have never been into popular music of any sort, and so I don't know who I would sing with or what I would sing.
Okay.
However, I will plug the ministry of St. Andrews Hall and the outreach, because those of you who have walked through the pandemic will remember that every Monday in the pandemic I was unavailable. It was because I was with Ross online, and he did a ministry to ministers who were locked in their houses.
Absolutely, I remember
And
that.
it was life-saving.
Thank you so much. That was a powerful, powerful ministry. Thank you so much. That's great. Apartment living is tricky. When we were in our townhouse in North Vancouver and we had all kinds of colorful characters, I would often say to my wife, I know Jesus said, love your neighbor. He never lived in a strata. I've searched the scriptures. I don't think Jesus lived in a condo, so I don't know. Yes, so love your neighbor is tested when you live in close quarters with people. That's why I live alone on an island now by myself. Good, okay. Let's go over here in the back, operating our technology.
Oh, yeah. My name is Don, and I live alone in a strata. Having just completed a 7-year stint as the president of the strata.
Oh, you know all about it then. Okay.
Yeah. It's full of challenges.
It is. It is. Yeah.
But it's a great opportunity to also show steadfast love of Jesus. To
Isn't that true?
people that are in the group. So that's what I like to do.
Good for you. Good for you.
If I could sing on stage, I would sing with Michael Bublé.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the song I would sing would be Sway.
Okay. I love Bublé stuff. Yeah. And a local boy from Burnaby. I like it.
Yeah.
That's great. I had a member of my church on the North Shore before I went to St. Andrews Hall, and he said he worked for a company, and his boss in Burnaby said, you have to come out and hear my kid. He's got a concert. He's just starting out. And everyone's like, oh, we don't want to go, but the boss is making us. And it was Michael Bublé. It was like one of his first concerts. So he's like, I was there at the beginning. So, yeah, that's cool. I love that. That's great. Thank you. And thanks for recording today, Don, as well. Let's slide into the second row. Go for it.
My name's Ornella, but everyone calls me Nella. I live with my husband Sean and our 3 wonderful cats.
Yay. Nice.
Because of one of them, we can't actually have house plants.
Okay, yes, that's a thing. That's a thing with cats.
And yes, our house is going to be really full soon because, as most of you know, I'm expecting. I'm at 7 months right now.
Congratulations.
And if I could sing on stage with any famous singer, what song would you sing? To be honest, I don't know if it would be a famous singer. I think I've been trying to. I really love when my husband sings.
Yeah, nice. Not everyone can say that, but there's that's great.
And I've been trying to get him to do like karaoke with me,
Awesome.
and so I think that would be great if we could just sing together.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
It's so great. I love that. At St. Andrews Hall, our chaplain's always coming up with new programs, and at our staff meeting, she said, we're going to have a karaoke night, and all the rest of the staff were like, oh, that's not going to work. And it was like one of the most popular things this fall. Like everyone came out. Yeah, so karaoke, it has a place. That's awesome. So good. Thanks so much for being here, and again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's keep going along.
I'm Stuart, and I live in a house on an acreage with my wife
Nice.
and a couple of dogs. And I'm liking
You can take a pass. You don't have to answer that question. It's okay. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. It's good to see you again. Thanks. Good morning.
I'm Rennie, his wife,
Yes.
56 years married,
Congratulations.
and we have 3 children,
Nice.
2 boys and a girl, 4 grandchildren, 3 girls and a boy.
Wow.
And,
That's good.
and my favorite singer is Celine Dion.
Lovely.
I love all her songs, so
Yes.
I can't really pick one.
Yeah. Do you remember when she sang at the Olympics?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Not
Yeah,
a dry eye in
that's
the
amazing.
house. She
I went to one of her concerts
Yeah.
years and years ago, and I was at the very back, at the top, and she's on the stage with the big camera,
Yeah,
you know,
right,
whatever,
right,
the
yeah.
screen, and I was just crying up there, just being there, you know.
You weren't the only one crying. I think that's what you do at Celine
Yeah,
Dion concerts.
yeah.
That's awesome. Good to see you again. Thank you so much. Good morning. Welcome.
Well, I'm Lynn Francis, and I also live in Strata.
Yeah.
Ours is a fairly small one with everybody's just, it's like our own little community.
That's lovely.
And
Yeah.
I did sort of get coerced into being the chair of council for
There
sure.
you go. You can compare notes afterwards. Yeah,
But,
that's right.
Overall, yes, things come and go, but
Yeah.
basically people are working well together
That's
there.
great. That's lovely.
I kind of live alone, although my children, who are my girls, who are fairly close, come often.
Nice.
And one daughter leaves the dog with me for a whole lot of time, and several months, and then when they're going, she takes off to Mexico, but
Oh,
it's
wow.
too hot for the dog.
Of course.
So the
Yeah.
dog stays with me.
Well,
Which
we'll count that under your roof. Yeah, that's good. A grand puppy.
moving.
That's great.
And I like jazz, and I like Diana Krall.
Great.
But songs, I don't know. I don't have one in particular that
Yeah.
I think of at this point.
But I can hear her voice and picture her style. Yeah, great. Diana Krall is fantastic. Thank you for coming.
Gospel clothes.
Ah, good, nice. That's great. We can make suggestions. Yeah. We'll keep going then. Good morning.
I'm Alice Broder, thank you. I'm happy to be with all these wonderful people. They're just so friendly and loving.
Great.
I live just at the corner behind Nico's nursery.
Okay.
And my husband and we go to a lot of the sports at the arena,
Nice.
curling club, lawn bowling, horseshoe pit. So we like to participate in the community, but as we get older, we're not doing so good anymore. But anyways, I still love this space.
Yeah.
But there is an apartment coming up, 6-story apartment
Wow.
building
Okay.
right across from us.
Yeah.
And we've been feeling very overwhelmed, but I love where we're at. So, anyways, my favorite singer has always been Doris Day. And
Oh,
she's
yeah.
all been gone, and it's Case the Dog, whatever.
Yeah, of course. That's a great choice. I'm so glad you came today. Thank you for joining us. Good morning.
I'm Marlene Martins, and I live alone in my house. I love my house, and my daughter's on my case to get out of it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I can do it on the yard.
Yes. I'm familiar with that changing. Yes, we just moved my mom last year, so yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm sitting there,
Yeah.
and when it comes to the singing part, that takes me back to when I was 13 years old, and we were at Mother's, we were going to have a Mother's Day thing at church.
Yes, good.
She had us practicing a song, and she said, somebody's very flat.
Oh.
You need to sing individually.
Oh, no.
Just, so it was me, and she said, from now on, you just move your mouth.
Just pretend to sing. Well, we could say, like, who would you lip sync with then? Yes, that's okay. Yes, very good.
And as singers, I love country music.
Yeah.
Jim Reeves is
Nice.
one of my favorites. And of course, Harry Russell, who used to come here and do a lot of gospel singing.
Yeah,
He
good.
passed away in March.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's
It's great. Good to have another fellow country music fan. I grew up in Manitoba, where we say country music is the soundtrack of heaven. But my BC children, adult children, do not agree with that. So I'm alone in my country music love. That's great. Good to have a fellow country music fan. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Shirley, who lives under my roof? My middle son does.
Yeah.
My oldest lives in Rupert. My youngest lives in Victoria.
Nice.
And we have a dog.
Okay, good.
He's a mixed breed.
Yeah.
He's 8 years old. His arthritis and my arthritis are about the same.
Right, okay.
And he has an anxiety disorder, which is an interesting thing to deal with his dog.
Yes.
But anyway, question for you.
Yes.
Do raccoons still run around at BST?
I think they have found a better place.
Oh, good.
I have no awareness of any raccoon problems at the moment. There are still like coyotes on the UBC campus. From time to time you see those. Maybe they dealt with the raccoons. I don't know.
When I lived on campus, there were people who were always trying to adopt squirrels.
Well, I felt I had to tell Helen to talk to the Korean parents
Yeah.
who wanted their little kids to play with the raccoons,
Oh dear.
which are wild animals.
Yes, not a good idea.
So it kind of worried me with the raccoons.
No doubt.
Anyway, who would I sing with? I don't know. There's lots of songs that I can't remember, but Alan Doyle.
Nice. Love her. Yeah. Well,
I would like to sing with
That's
Alan
great.
Doyle.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming out today.
Alan. Oh. Used to have a group called the Great Big Sea.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
a
yeah.
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland.
He's a Newfoundland.
Oh, that
Yes,
one.
yeah, that's good. Some good East Coast music. Awesome. Great.
My name is Michelle. I live in Silver Creek with my dog and a roommate.
Nice.
And for now. And if I could sing on stage, I would definitely be Lady Gaga, but I would be crooning with Dean Martin to White Christmas.
Come on. Great choice. Great choice. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming out. Last but not least.
My name is Diane. I live in a house with my husband in Enderby.
Yeah.
Near Enderby, I should say. And this is probably one of those things that nobody knows about me. But my favorite song from 50 years ago, I don't know if it's my favorite anymore.
Yeah.
Convoy.
Oh, yeah.
It's the dark of the moon, the sick of the moon. I know all the words.
Oh, yeah. That's right. That's a great song. It's a great song.
I'm not as crazy about it after the convoy we had.
Well, yes. Hold on. Yes. Yeah. That may have changed the way we look at it. That's right. Well, that's good. Thank you, and thanks for being here. So I'm Ross, who lives under my roof. Again, I'm on Bowen Island. My wife, Laura, and our 13-year-old daughter, Sadie, and our 19-year-old son is going to University of North Van. So he's sometimes home, sometimes other places. We have our eldest is living out in Abbotsford, so not under a roof. And we have an Airedale Terrier who's a year and a half. I think I usually put a picture of her in every presentation, so she'll show up. and we have Marie the cat, and we got them as a puppy and a kitten at the same time, and they actually get along. It's quite remarkable. We didn't know if it was going to work, but we tried it this time because we've always had like alternating, and it's been a bad scene. So got them at the same time, and it works well. If I could sing on stage, I think I always loved Kenny Rogers. And we're resurrection people, so even though he's no longer with us, I'll say Kenny Rogers. Maybe The Gambler would be a good one to sing with him, but...
That was my second choice.
Excellent. Good. Oh, you've got a great selection. And so we've had a chance to get to know each other a little bit better. We're going to begin our theme, and I just really hope today is just a blessing for you as we come together. It's such a great idea just to get together for a little bit on a Saturday, focus on some education, and whatever you take away, you take away. And I pray that our conversations are rich for you. I wanted to start just by kind of thinking back over this past year of discipleship and invite you to do some reflection with me. And I've selected a very short series of Bible verses to look at first thing before we get into the kind of conditions of faith here on the West Coast today. So almost more like kind of an opening devotional type thing. And I was looking at the story of the Apostle Paul. And really, as you can see, it's basically just over one chapter in the book of Acts. But there's a lot that's taking place here. And I led a study group last spring through Turkey and Greece. And so I think from that experience, I think it was the third or fourth time I've led kind of a study tour through that region. And so the movement of the Apostle Paul is really what you track as you go through Turkey and Greece. And I was thinking about Paul's story. And there's like really profound parts of Paul's story. And let me give you a little background. So if you know much about the Apostle Paul, you know that he is of Jewish ancestry. He was a Torah, or what we might call an Old Testament scholar. When the church was in its earliest stage, after the resurrection of Jesus, he was actually a persecutor of the early church. Christianity wasn't yet called Christianity. Christians were known as people of the way. And it was seen to be like a renewal movement within Judaism, that some within Judaism said, no way, that shouldn't take place. And Paul was one of those who was against the earliest movement of the Christian church, until, of course, as you recall, he had this famous encounter on the road to Damascus in Syria as he was going to persecute Christians, where he meets Jesus, and he has a life-transforming conversion experience, and then flip-flops and becomes arguably one of the best-known Christian evangelists of all time. Like, even to this day, there are cities and hockey rinks and everything named after Paul, right? He's famous. And there is someone who takes him under his wing when he's having this identity shift, really, from Saul to Paul. He even changes his name, almost like Hollywood celebrities sometimes go by a symbol or something like that. And Barnabas takes him under his wing. And I've always liked Barnabas. Now, if that's a new name to you, even if you've been reading the Bible for a while, you're not to blame, because Barnabas is really kind of a lesser-known disciple. But Barnabas, his name translated from the Greek literally means like son or child of encouragement. He's an encourager. And I don't know about you, but for all the years of following Jesus, I've really needed people who encourage me. Like, encouragement is something that's so important in discipleship. And that's exactly what Barnabas does with Paul, is some people were afraid to even be around Paul, right? Like, he had persecuted them. And yet Barnabas takes him under his wing, embraces him in Antioch, and starts helping him understand even more about what it means to be a disciple. Well, they go on their first missionary journey just before this in the book of Acts. And as they go, people always think Paul is the star, but he was like the assistant minister, and Barnabas was the senior minister. And Paul's first missionary journey, they traveled through what we call Turkey today, and that's where Paul actually preaches his first Christian sermon. But it's under the direction of Barnabas. In theology schools, we call this field education. It's like a field education experiment for Paul. But something happens on that first missionary journey that's quite interesting, and that is, it was supposed to be a mission team not of 2 to go tell people about Jesus, but it was supposed to be a mission team of 3. And there was a third person called John Mark that was invited by Barnabas. And as they start out and things get a little difficult, John Mark bails on them. He says, I'm out. I'm not doing this. I'm going home. And so Barnabas and Paul continue. They have some challenging times, but it's a successful mission tour. They come back to Antioch, and then they're ready to go for round 2, a second missionary trip. And Barnabas, remember what his name means, son of encouragement, he wants to give John Mark a second chance. He says, okay, I know it didn't work out last time. We all make mistakes. We should take John Mark with us again. And Paul says, absolutely not. That guy bailed on us last time. There's no way that we're going to take a chance on him. And Paul and Barnabas have a falling out. Now, they didn't actually box each other. I found this, and I thought this was awesome, so I put this up. But they have a fight, which, if any of you have been through church fights over the years, they're painful, right? They're really painful. I would say loss of Christian friendship has been some of the most painful loss I've experienced over the years, right? Because we know that we're called to something better, but we're still human beings and stuff happens, right? And so this is how the Bible records it. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they're doing. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them. But Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement, that's polite Bible speak for an all-out fight, that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark, he took John Mark, and sailed for Cyprus. So off they go. They're still going to go, but Paul's actually choosing not to go. And Paul chose someone else named Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. And they went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So this is a really hard story. It's a hard story of loss. And when thinking about this past year, loss is something that we all experience in one way or another. The death of a friend or a loved one, loss of employment. For some, it's a loss of a stage of life. Maybe we can't do things that we used to be able to do. And I just want to give you just a couple of minutes to think back on this year. When I say year of ministry, that's the year of discipleship. Where have you experienced loss? What has been maybe a pain point for you in your discipleship, in your leadership here at the church? And where have you experienced God in the midst of this? So I invite you to just turn to another person, groups of 2s or 3s, and maybe just share one experience of loss from this last year. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to do that now. Go ahead and move chairs as you need to.
You guys want to split up? We can take one of yours.
So it's okay, that's all right. It's okay.
This year,
Well, I kind of feel like I'm talking about this a lot. Just on Monday night special Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening. I essentially have my friend Laura, who's in grade 4, who's a great sister, and sometimes play. And we tend to forget about now, long-term disability doesn't mean she's never going to go back to work. I am able to be working in such a community.
Every week I see a lot of things, my screen.
I go beyond what you're always like, and you Christian for me, the grace when I come to that, and I also do
kind of hard.
Place where I watch
each other all the way.
Sometimes this is where I would conversation with each other.
Want them to not have pain anymore. Want them to
That's where my
hardly not having today's birthday.
It's just been ongoing on and off. So, like, it's kind of hard, because
She's Christian.
I sometimes think I'm just an angry person. Like, I don't know, she's, I think she just likes to find problems. And it's kind of been very difficult for me because I try to tell.
Paul's story is one of loss, but it's not just one of loss. Because as we follow the story on, and again, we're just really in one little chapter, basically, of the book of Acts, there's also a story of addition that takes place. So it's not just loss. What we find is that Paul takes Silas, and Barnabas takes John Mark, and they split up, and they go in different directions. This is like a breakup in many ways. It's very painful. But as Paul continues on his ministry through what today we call Turkey, back then it was the Roman province of Asia, he adds a new person to his team. And the addition is really important because as we read through the New Testament, Timothy becomes a really key leader in the early church. He picks up Timothy along the way. And Timothy is someone who has been raised, and he's in a family that's a mixed family. So it's a half Jewish, half Greek family. Willie Jennings, the great African-American scholar and theologian, describes Timothy as the mulatto boy, he calls him, coming from two very different worlds. And the Bible says Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was Jewish and a believer. And by that, so the distinction there is that means a Christian believer, so a Jewish Christian mother, but whose father was a Greek. The believers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Paul wanted to take him along on a journey, so he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area. For they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. Now this is important because what decisions? This is where Paul went to Jerusalem to say, look, I've been out there and you thought what Jesus did was just for our own Jewish people, but actually it's for everybody. And the decision was, yes, the gospel is good news for every human creature, not just those with a Jewish ethnic identity. And Timothy is one of the ones early on that models that. He is half Gentile, half Jew. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in numbers. This sense of addition, Paul's ability to look out and to see potential in people and to add them to his team, pays off in splendid ways as we move forward in his story. I kind of want to think that was something that rubbed off on Paul from Barnabas. And I think that's part of the thing, even when we think about loss, for most of us, once we've had time to set loss in some kind of perspective, it's not necessarily all terrible. There are moments that we think back and we remember. And so Barnabas' generous nature, we see in Paul as he adds Timothy here, who goes on to be the primary leader of the church in Ephesus. But he also adds people like Titus and others. He really does a great job of raising up young leaders. And so this story, while it's a story that begins in loss, it also is a story of addition, not just loss. And so you can anticipate the question. I'd love for you to think back on 2025. We're just so new into 2026. Where did you experience growth or gain? And how is this addition? Maybe even you think about here the church, people, programs, responsibilities, or maybe it's in your personal life where you've experienced addition. Where have you experienced God in the midst of this? So take a moment and think not about loss, but about gain and addition. And could you give an example of where this last year you've experienced gain in your life, either here at the church or in your own personal life? Take a couple of minutes and check in with people in your group on that. As you hear that story of Timothy joining with Paul and Silas in ministry, perhaps there's some new insights when we think about the full range of emotion, right, that Paul is going through. I think Bible characters can sometimes appear a little wooden to us, right? We just read them off the page. But when you think about this as a human being human, here's someone who's just had a major upset and break with the person who has mentored them all the way through this kind of fundamental change in their identity. And now it's come to an end. And as he's putting the pieces back together, God places in front of him this new person. And I don't know about you, sometimes that's the way I've experienced life as I've gone through a season of struggle or doubt. God opens a door and there is a new opportunity or a new person, and that becomes really important. So not only is it a story of loss, but it's a story of gain, and it's also a story of disruption. So when we continue on, and these are like literally, I'm just reading right through, I'm not splicing anything, this is just the story as it continues. We have this fascinating turn where Paul, now with Silas and Timothy, his ministry team is building. Paul is following the original route that he did that first missionary journey with Barnabas. So he's literally retracing, he's checking in on these small Christian house churches that he and Barnabas helped start. And then something really strange happens. Here's what the Bible says. Paul and his companions, that's Silas and Timothy now, Paul and his companions traveled through the region of Phrygia and Galatia. That's a part of Turkey, what we call Turkey Day. But having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus, and the Holy Spirit and the Spirit of Jesus are the same, the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision, a dream of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And after Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Now, this is a very interesting turn of events. So Paul, upset at the breakup with his good friend Barnabas, proceeds anyways on the missionary journey. He adds Timothy, who I'm sure he was greatly encouraged to have someone as talented as Timothy. He must be starting to feel good. Okay, let's go. But then as they start moving in the direction that he thought they were going to go, all of these roadblocks start appearing. And he literally feels God's Spirit saying, "No, stop. You thought you were going that way, but turn around. Go another way. You're not to go that way." It's a major disruption. And again, kind of the roller coaster of emotions for Paul. He must start down kind of the roller coaster of emotion going into the pits again, saying, but here I am, like I followed your call. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do, and now it's not working out. So he goes to a place called Troas, which is very close to the ancient city of Troy. And when you visit there, they actually, the biblical archaeological site purchased, you know, the wooden horse from the movie with Brad Pitt? They actually purchased that horse, and you can go up inside it. I did. It was kind of cheesy but fun. And so this is where Paul is. He's basically in the ancient city of Troy. It's the new city called Troas with a seaport. And he goes to sleep, and he has a dream. And this dream this is a picture here from a city called Kavala. The Bible says, as we'll see later, that he lands in a place called Neapolis, but it doesn't exist anymore. The closest modern city in Greece is called Kavala. And the Church of St. Nicholas, this beautiful Greek Orthodox church in that town, on the front, most churches keep their nicest things for inside the church, but this church has it on the outside. This is what you see as you're walking down the street. Look at all the little icon, like little bits and pieces there. It's so beautiful. And they have this depiction of the Macedonian man calling Paul to come over to Macedonia. So it's a story of disruption. Like, nothing is working out the way Paul thought it would. I don't know, can anyone relate to that? Maybe all of your plans work out the way. If you do, I want to talk to you after. That would be amazing. Because that certainly is not my life. And so not only do we have a story of loss and a story of gain, but we have a story of disruption. So I would love for you to just take a few minutes and think back over this past year, 2025. Where did you experience disruption, or maybe like some sudden shift or change? And it may be different than just, you know, kind of loss or gain. It might just be like confusion, like, I don't know what happened or what happened, that kind of thing. Some disruption, some sudden shift or change. And how has this interruption influenced and shaped your leadership, your discipleship, your life of faith? Where have you experienced God in the midst of this? So think back over the last year. Think of one disruption where something clearly didn't go the way that you thought it would be. And what did you learn from that disruption? Take a couple of minutes and check in with someone around you. And as we return to Scripture, this thought about what does it mean to maybe acknowledge God is actively at work in disruption. I don't know about you, I usually find disruptions annoying. The illusion of control is something that the world wants us to have, right?
But we've just been through Advent. It's entirely disruption.
It's all disruption, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. A baby, a savior born in a manger in Bethlehem was not really something people expected, even though there was prophecy foretold, right? You're absolutely right. And so disruption, just offer that for you in your own discipleship. It's just something to think about. Like, could it be that when we go through these moments of disruption, that God is actively at work in that? And I want to be careful how I say that, because disruption can often include feelings of pain. So I'm not saying that God doesn't somehow inflict pain on us. I'm not saying that. But I think, you know, when we look back over time, sometimes the disruption can be a really amazing opportunity for us to learn more about ourselves and more about God as well. There's one last move in this scripture. And again, I'm always just amazed at how much is packed into just basically one chapter of the Bible is what we've been looking at already here. So what happens? Well, so Paul follows through. He wakes up. Imagine the surprise for Silas and Timothy, and he says, pack your bags, boys, we're going to Europe, we're going to Macedonia. And so they get up, they pack their bags, they step on a ship that takes them to what the Bible calls Neapolis. And again, that doesn't exist anymore, but it was a major seaport at the time. Well, let the Bible speak for itself here. From Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace. And the next day, we went to Neapolis. Now they're on land. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia. And we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. Now by Sabbath, these are Jewish Christians, and at this point, the Sabbath was still by Christians being maintained as sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday. So they went expecting to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. "If you consider me a believer in the Lord," she said, "come and stay at my house." And she persuaded us. Now, this is a fascinating story. There's a lot going on here. So Paul has accepted the vision given to him, even though he was still feeling upset that God had disrupted his plans of where he was supposed to go. He accepts that God had a different plan. He takes the ship over, and something really important happens. He steps off that boat, and for the first time that we are aware of, the gospel arrives in Europe. And so that's a pretty major development in the history of the Christian church, right? You could almost argue, I think it worked. I think it stuck when you look at history and great European cathedrals and so forth. And so he makes his way to the major city of the area, Philippi, and trying to figure out what to do there. Now we know that Paul was a tradesperson. He was a leather worker, some would say like a tent maker. And so often he would go to the marketplace, to the agora, and that's where he would engage in conversation with people as he's fixing their canvas and so forth. He would have an opportunity to talk about his faith in Jesus. And it was also the way that he paid his way. He was bivocational from the very beginning. But on the Sabbath, they look for a place to pray, and they go outside of the city down to the river. To this day, you can visit what's left of Philippi. They've excavated it, and it's a site that you can visit. But just down the road is a river that flows outside of Philippi, and they've built a Greek Orthodox church there, and it's a beautiful place to visit, and it's the traditional site of where Paul met Lydia. Now, there's several things going on here. Number one, who can remember the vision that Paul had in Troas? Who appeared in his dream? It was a Macedonian man. Where is the Macedonian man now that they are in Macedonia? Not there, but there's women. So that's a surprise, right? Okay. So, it would be like if someone says, "Can you come to my house for dinner?" and you knock on the door and they're not there, but someone else is. It's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm coming for dinner. And so there's surprise built in there. And there's another surprise that is a little harder to spot, and that is Lydia herself is from Thyatira. Why does that matter? Thyatira is a place in Turkey that I just visited in May, and just recently they've had archaeologists uncover some of the stones in Thyatira that reveal the businesses that were there, and they've uncovered a stone of the Purple Dye Guild in Thyatira. That was a big business there. But any of you who've been in business, it's one thing to produce something, you have to get it to market. Well, that's Lydia. She would go to her hometown of Thyatira, buy up a bunch of purple cloth, and then go on the road and sell it, almost like you'd have someone at like a craft market, a Saturday craft market, selling stuff. That was what she did. And so Paul has gone all the way to Europe only to meet someone from close to home. This would be like you saying, "I'm going to be a foreign missionary. I'm going to a foreign country," and you meet someone from Vernon there as the first person that you share the gospel with. You think, why did they go all the way around the world? They could have just stayed home. We could have met at Tim Hortons halfway, right? And so he meets someone who's literally just from where he came from. But this person, their ears are open to the gospel. She was a worshiper of God. Some feel that means that she was maybe ethnically Jewish and had that background. But the gospel is shared, and she opens not only her heart, but her whole household. In the Reformed tradition, some of you may have spent part of your life in Christian traditions where there's only adult baptism. And that's fine. I mean, that's a wonderful part of the Christian community. But in our tradition, we also baptize babies. And the biblical basis for that is all throughout the New Testament we read that people and their household were baptized. In this same city, Paul and Silas, of course, end up in Philippi getting in trouble with the law, and they're put in prison. Do you remember that part of the story? And then the earthquake happens, and they stay, they're singing hymns, and the jailer is so overcome by their witness that he invites them in, and guess what? His whole household is baptized. So presumably children, infants, everybody gets baptized. And there are others who say, not only is this a surprise in many ways that it's a group of women, but because Lydia was a businesswoman who traveled from Roman city to Roman city selling purple dye, and then when she was out, went back to Thyatira and bought more, she would have had business connections right across the Roman Empire in all these different cities. And it's presumed by Bible scholars that she probably wrote letters of introduction, so that when Paul arrived somewhere in an agora to set up shop, he would say, "Oh, I'm a friend of Lydia's." And they'd say, "Oh, good enough for us, you can set up over here." So the way in which God is working here, like you couldn't predict, is fascinating what happens. And it's just full of surprise. Like when you think of where we started with Paul and Barnabas having their falling out earlier in the chapter before, we could never have imagined that Paul would end up in Europe with this group of converts that then further advance his ministry. So, I love the look at that guy. Let's take one last reflection as we look back on 2025. Where has God surprised you? And how has the surprise in the way the gospel has touched, blessed, and changed lives impacted, say, your leadership or your discipleship? Like, how has it impacted you? And looking back now, where have you witnessed God at work in the midst of all this? So name one surprise from 2025. And what has God taught you about that surprise? Take a couple of minutes and check it. On the year past, and this is a picture from within that beautiful Greek Orthodox church by the riverside, traditional site of where Paul met Lydia. So this is part of our discipleship, is responding to what God is doing in the world in times of loss or gain, times of disruption, times of surprise. And we all experience things differently, of course. We're not all experiencing loss or gain or disruption or surprise at the same time. So I often think in a church setting, we're experiencing our discipleship in different ways, but we're all kind of working together. I really like what I call the pirate ship here. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but when I think about churches, having been a pastor now 3 decades, I think in terms of so many different reactions to sharing life together. So I hope you can see that okay. The invitation is, when you think about your discipleship being exercised here at St. Andrew's Church, what number would best describe you at this particular moment? So it doesn't need to be like forever and all time, but just as we begin 2026, what number? And I'll just describe a couple of them, and then I'll give you a moment to have a look. So number 1 is a champion, right? You are just celebrating what's going on in this church. Number 3, maybe a little more reflective. That's someone who's, what would we say? That they're kind of testing. They're getting a sense of where is God leading us with the kite. Maybe number 2, someone's more intentional about what's coming up. Number 4 might feel like you're just barely holding on as you're sailing along. Every church I visit, there are some people who think change is happening too fast. That's a 15. And then there's people who think change is happening so fast they've been left behind. Look at the poor guy running behind the ship. And there's different reactions, pulling together as a team, feeling like you're in charge, leadership. maybe working hard in the midst. There's the artist painting. That person is physically sick. That's not a starfish, just that you know. It's not a starfish. And then Mark Laberton, who's an American Presbyterian minister and professor at Fuller Seminary, always talks about saboteurs, which is not very polite. We don't often talk about that in church, but having been a congregational minister many years, it is true. There are people, whether they're willfully doing it or not, that's what the canon is here. Someone who's trying to blow things up, right? They're just, these are people who thrive in a crisis, and if everything's going well, they need to create a crisis. You know, that kind of thing.
It's like the book Church Duology, figuring out who's the serpent, who's the wolf, and who's the lamb.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. That's good. So take a moment and think about which number best describes your experience of being part of this church right now. And this is not share or die, as I call it, where you're going to have to confess your number. But I will invite one or two people, if you feel like it, would you like to reveal what number you feel you are right now?
17. No, just joking.
I knew it. Exactly. That's right. 17 is the cannonball person. I don't know what 19 is. I'm always confused. I don't know what 19 is doing.
Pretending to be a shark.
It's a shark. Yeah, it's pretending to be a shark. It's got a little shark hat on. That's good. This person's drowning. That person is just on their own private island. This is the person you ask to do stuff. They never do stuff, right? They're just always
So that's the smart guy at the end.
This guy, whereabouts at the end there? Yeah, that's right.
I'm number 2 and 6.
2 and 6, nice. So let's have a look. So 6
Well, my dad has pictures of number 14 of me on every boat.
Okay. That's that person there. Good. That's great. Anyone else? Do you identify with the number? You don't have to reveal it.
Yeah, probably 2 as well, just
2.
because I tend to be a cautious person.
Yeah, and so kind of like scanning the horizon, getting a sense of where is this going. And you can see how like these multiple roles are needed. And I think one of the things when it comes to discipleship, it always kind of appears in the singular. But discipleship takes so many different forms. And I think different forms at different times of our lives as well. I'm always deeply mindful of that when I visit congregations, that people will describe how they used to be involved in a church and how that's changed over time. And that's okay. And so just knowing that you have different changing roles within the church. Okay. Well, before lunch now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look at discipleship and mission today. And we're going to do that by looking at the changing nature of Christianity, yes, in Canada, but then specifically in British Columbia. And then after lunch, what we'll do is we'll spend some time thinking about what that actually looks like in the practice of ministry based on some research that I've done. And so I often think in terms of like, what's the end of faith? And by the end, I don't mean the end, but like to what end or for what purpose are we involved in a faith community? And in many ways, we speak about doxology or praise of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's what we're kind of being moved towards as disciples. And the area of the university that I work in, like academically speaking, is called missiology or mission studies. And one of the things that just fascinates me is, just like we saw in the example of the Apostle Paul, God was clearly at work in that story, right? God shows up in ways, often in ways unexpected, and to be frank, unwanted sometimes, right? Paul had his plan, and it got disrupted. So part of what I do is asking the question, what in the world is God up to, literally? So when I work in congregations, when I do studies, I'm interviewing, for example, right now, elders in Presbyterian congregations without clergy. And I have a survey that's been completed by about 100 elders across the country. I'm now into actual interviews. And I'm listening to what people are telling me, wondering, I wonder where God is at work in the midst of all of this. Kind of puzzling it out.
Creating.
Yeah, absolutely still creating. And one of the challenges in trying to get a sense of what God is up to is that the church itself has had a pretty dramatic change in its role in society over the course of our lifetime. So 2 colleagues at the University of Toronto, Brian Clark and Stuart McDonald. Brian is at Emmanuel College, now retired, and Stuart McDonald is at Knox College, now retired. I actually just saw Brian last month when I was in Toronto at a conference. They did some really good work. This was published by McGill Queen's University Press in 2017. And what they did is they went and they looked at census data. As you may know, every 10 years, the Canadian government asks Canadians all kinds of questions, like what kind of peanut butter do you eat, and that kind of thing, and what's your annual income, and how many people under your roof. And they also ask the religion question, which surprises some people because people say, oh, I thought there was a separation of church and state, but that's not actually a Canadian ideal, that's American. Because we have British heritage, there's never been officially a separation of church and state, because the King of Canada is also, the head of the Church of England, right? So, yes, we don't have a state church, but religion is something the government has always been able to ask about. So the very first census was 4 years after Confederation in 1871, and they already asked the religion question at that point. So from a research perspective, it's amazing. You can go back right to the founding of Canada as a country and get a sense of the changing patterns of faith. So what they did is they went back to 1941 and they looked at all of the census data right up to 2011. What they found probably won't surprise you, that decline in Christian affiliation, membership, and participation started in the 1960s, and it picked up pace rapidly since then. They anticipate the trend will continue. And what they say is we're entering into kind of a post-Christian era. And by post-Christian, these are both wonderful, wonderful people, both very faithful Christians. They're not saying a time where Christianity is not true. By post-Christian, what they mean is a time where you can't take for granted that the person in the apartment across the hall from you or the house beside you, the new neighbor moves in, that they'll know anything at all about Christianity, right? Whereas some of us still have memories, growing up in Manitoba, in the public school system, we would have scripture read every morning before class started. We have to stand by our desks and say the Lord's Prayer in a public school, right? So that's what they mean by post-Christian, where Christianity is one religion among many in the country, and there are lots of our neighbors who don't have any exposure to it. And so the 60s is when they describe that change. Added to that is the increasing challenge that if people know something about Christianity, it's not always positive, based on mission history, including the history of residential schools. And I give the example here of Kamloops and the discovery there. I think that is a significant shift. I remember when I played high school rugby, and I kind of cautiously went to my coach, who was known to be a little gruff, and I said, I'm going to be late to practice on Sunday morning. And he kind of, he looked a little unhappy, and he said, well, why? And I said, well, I teach Sunday school at my church. And I don't think he was a churchgoer, but he said, that's really important. You should do that. You're allowed to be late, right? So even growing up in Manitoba, if someone wasn't a churchgoer, they had kind of this positive sense, Christianity is a good thing, right? And I think the reality is that has shifted. Sam Chase is a fellow mission professor in Canada, and he writes this: something is very different in the current Canadian zeitgeist, just the spirit or the times that we live in, compared to one, say, 30 years ago. There's a growing rejection of Christianity. Christianity is not seen as having a positive influence in the Canadian mosaic. The question being asked today is not whether Christianity is true, but whether it is good for Canada and for being human. And increasingly the answer is no. Now that sounds super, super negative. I wouldn't say, I would go as far as that. I do think, however, that we need to be aware that the reputation of Christianity is mixed today. Right, so just this week I have a graduate of ours who's serving in Cape Breton. And he was wearing his clergy collar at the A&W, he told me, having his morning coffee. And he said two guys came up and said, are you a Catholic priest? They said, no, I'm a Presbyterian minister. Do you want to sit down? And they said, yeah. And they sat down. And they talked with him about their like really negative childhood experiences of being involved in the church. And the former student of mine emailed me to say, man, I just wanted a coffee. I was just going to Tim Hortons or A&W or whatever, right? But the fact that he would sit and hear these people out on their experiences, he said it was actually a really remarkable conversation, right? So if he didn't have time to hear any like negative experiences of the church, or if he jumped in too quickly and tried to dismiss it, it would not have gone well. But he was able to just sit and listen, and so this is the shift that's happened. My guess is that we could name pretty clearly some examples of the shift in our own time and place. I use the language of the end of Christendom. That sounds a bit fussy. Christendom is simply like 1,500 plus years from the 4th century on, when the Roman emperor embraced Christianity as the public religion, right up until kind of the last century, where Christianity no longer was in the center of society in the same way. So examples of kind of the end of Christendom, Merry Christmas to Happy Holidays, Sunday sports, Sunday shopping. Can you think of some examples, either here in Salmon Arm or where you grew up, where it's different now than, say, even a few decades ago? And by different, I mean the role of the church or Christianity getting a kind of a privileged place. What comes to mind? Yeah, what do you think?
I'm just looking back at my, I went to a United Church in North Van prior to moving here. And when I went to the church, we did have a Bible group, a Bible study. We had a youth group.
Yep.
And yes, it was mixed ages, but like as the years went on, it was definitely an older crowd.
Right.
Children stopped coming.
Yeah.
And there was no youth group.
Yes.
So that was kind of like watching firsthand the gradual decline.
That shift, yeah. Well, that's a good example, right? So where we used to assume that churches would always have Sunday schools and youth groups, that's no longer an assumption that we can make, right?
Yeah.
Good.
And it's something I personally think about a lot for Little Century.
Yes, of course you do. Of course you do. Yeah, that's right. And how to kind of build that support network for children in this church. Good. That's excellent. Other examples?
In my first few congregations that I served, there was an assumption within the community that you would take your turn writing the article for the church in the paper.
Good,
In Nova Scotia, I had to take my turn preaching for the radio.
Yes, good.
And all those things.
Yeah.
But since moving here, even just getting to put a little article in the newspaper, you've got to go through many layers to get permission to do that.
Good. Yes. That's a good example. So what we might call public theology, like the assumption that a Christian leader, in this case, would just be given kind of a podium in public. Like when I was first ordained in Northern Ontario, whenever there was a civic function, I was like the lone Reformed minister in town, so I'd always be asked to open the new fire hall, right? Where like today, you wouldn't be asked as a minister to do that kind of thing. Like so that you were more like a civic official in some ways, and that certainly has shifted and changed. I think, was there an example up here?
Well, I thought I did, but I'm not sure because I was going to a Bible study group in Silver Creek because it was closer.
Yeah.
But I felt that they were taking their interpretations too far that I didn't understand, so I quit going.
Yeah.
But it didn't make me stop coming to church or reading the Bible. I just do it on my own because I'm like, they just, I just took it apart. Like, how do they know about their investments and where they put their money? And it was just too far.
Interesting. I mean, something there for sure that I've seen is that people today move between different churches much more freely. Like it used to be kind of like you would always be you'd be Anglican or United or Presbyterian or Baptist, where these days your denominational background means very little. At least as I've experienced it, people feel far more free to just switch between traditions, right? Yeah, good. Now, this is kind of in general, but it's really a particular thing on the West Coast. And so this is where I hope, it comes to discipleship. Being a follower of Jesus on the West Coast, it has some particularities, and I would say some peculiarities, being a follower of Jesus here. And so there's been some really good research. I know Christmas is over and your credit card is sagging and you don't want to order anything more. But if you're at all interested, here's some interesting books that explore the unique aspects of religion in British Columbia. The one at the end we'll talk about after lunch. That's the research that's just been published by McGill Queen's University Press on Christianity in Vancouver. But really it's kind of like West Coast spirituality. I'm sure that you will highly relate to what's in there. The first three are noteworthy. Lynn Marks is really great. She is the historian, one of the historians at the University of Victoria. She's not a Christian. She would define herself as a secular Jew, but her academic research is in Christianity. When she was, I think she was at Waterloo before, and so she did a lot of history of Christianity in Upper Canada. But for years she's been at University of Victoria, and so she has shifted her research to the West Coast. And this book really is quite interesting. It's called Infidels and the Damned Churches, and that comes from a direct quote. The subtitle that you will not be able to read here is called Irreligion, like no religion, and Religion in Settler British Columbia. So here's what she does. She has a look at British Columbia in the 1800s, when places like Salmon Arm were first being established and so forth. There's actually a good section of the book on the interior of British Columbia. And what she does is she notes why British Columbia is different. Her argument is that Christianity was never fully established here on the West Coast. Right, so what was the old nickname for Toronto? It's hard to imagine it now, but it used to be called Toronto. Toronto the Good. Why was it known as Toronto the Good?
Because of all the Christians there?
Yeah, because Christianity, it was known as kind of a dour, like really Christian, but kind of like a conservative, and I don't mean like in theology, like in kind of social lifestyle. The Orange Order was really popular. There was kind of this traditional notion of religion and obligation. And so the Christian Women's Temperance Union was founded in Toronto during Prohibition. The Lord's Day Alliance was struck to prevent streetcars from running on the Sabbath. Like it was like old-time religion. And so what she says is who came to British Columbia in the 1800s? Almost exclusively young men. Why did they come? They came to get rich quick. And how did they get rich? How did they get rich in the 1800s? Mining, for sure. The gold rush. What else do you think?
Forestry industry.
Yeah.
Forest industry was huge. She has a really great section on forestry. A little bit in fishing, and some in manufacturing, but like mining, what she says, and she uses mining as a specific example, she says that it was an extractionist mindset, that young men came here to get rich fast, to take their money and go somewhere else. And she makes an argument, it's quite interesting, that that's kind of in the DNA of British Columbia. That's why it's highly individualistic. And it might not be mining, well, ironically, there's so many mining companies based in Vancouver today, headquartered at least, but now it's in real estate, right? It's in Hollywood North, it's in the IT industry, that it's still a place people come. I was in an Uber in Toronto last month, and the guy said, oh yeah, I want to move out to Vancouver, I hear you can get rich fast there. And I didn't have the heart to say, please don't come, like no. Actually, I did say to him, BC stands for Bring Cash. I did say that to him. I don't think he got the joke. And so, yeah, exactly. And so here's the thing with Lynn Marks that's really interesting, is that she says one of the trademarks of young men coming to be pioneers and settlers here was they wanted to also escape the religious obligations of Eastern Canada. And so you can look at census data that she does. We saw that book earlier from the 41 census. She looks at the 19th century census data. And already there was a higher percentage of people not declaring themselves as people of faith in British Columbia right from the very first census. And she does some really cool work. She goes into the records of census takers who would go out like to logging camps and stuff like that and take the census. And people would say, young men would say, I don't have any religion. And the census takers would say, well, you can't say that. That's not allowed. So we'll call you a spiritualist. So like, are you Baptist, are you Catholic, are you Presbyterian, United, whatever? Well, this is before United, but Methodist. They'd have all the categories, and they had to start adding categories on in British Columbia, kind of these general categories. Now, today in 2026, to tell the Canadian government I have no religion, as you'll see in a minute, is like normal. But back then it was socially like, you can't really say that. But the point being that in the DNA of this beautiful place that we live, it's never really been a place where the majority of the population expresses a Christian identity. And so if we're struggling at times as churches, there's some history to it. Tina Block was her PhD student at the University of Victoria. She's now the historian down the road at Thompson Rivers in Kamloops. And she took this research and she pushed it into the 20th century. And she has similar findings, except she does some ethnographic work and interviews families that are on their third or fourth generation raised without any religious background whatsoever. And then Religion at the Edge is a recent study of Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, and Victoria, and that was led by Paul Bramadat, who's at religious studies, just retired at the University of Victoria. And there what he found is he said, the subtitle is Nature, Spirituality, and Secularity in the Pacific Northwest. And he really focuses on kind of the shared interest in nature in this area, which I'll say more about afterwards. If we're struggling with why things are different, one of the ways to kind of get our heads around it as disciples of Jesus is that we say we live in a secular society, but there are movements of the secular. So Charles Taylor is retired now from McGill University in Montreal, and he is a world-renowned philosopher. He's also a very faithful Christian. He's a Roman Catholic. And like when I go to conferences in Europe and that kind of thing, they're quoting Taylor. He's like the guy. And here's what he says. This book is like 750 pages long, so it's a bit of an effort. But one of the things that his founding question in this book is really quite interesting. He says, I don't get it. He says, I don't get it. We could go in a time machine 500 years ago to Europe, and almost everyone would say they were Christian. Now, whether they actually went to church very much, whatever. And then we go forward in a time machine to the year 2000, when he wrote that. And he said, now, like, being Christian is one option among many, and often not the one people choose. So he wants to know, like, what happened? How do we go from a dominant religious worldview to now that it's shrunk? And this is what he says. The first step of society becoming secular was actually the work of the church itself. Because the church itself made a distinction between what was holy and sacred and what was profane or secular. So we had sacred people, priests, nuns, monks, living, doing holy things on our behalf. And then we had the secular, the profane, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, right? Now at the Reformation, they tried to correct that and say, no, everyone has a ministry. But the work of secularization had already begun. Secular, too, is simply fewer and fewer people declaring themselves to be religious. And what he says is we've now entered into secular 3, where religious understanding is no longer the default of human societies. Not believing in God and still having meaning in what he calls the immanent frame, the here and now, is possible and common. And you can have a totally humanist worldview, and and that's normal, right? So you could be certainly agnostic, but even you could be an atheist, and you could run for city council, or you could do whatever you want, and it's not going to impact you. People are not going to be upset about that in 2026 Canada. I think what we're seeing, what's interesting, is we're starting to see a turn. And we're starting to see a turn now in what's being called post-secular. And it's starting to happen more and more, not universally, not 100%, but there is a growing trend that's being documented certainly throughout Europe. I was just reading last night a very interesting article from the Church of Sweden. As you know, Sweden is one of the most secular countries in all of Europe. And the number of young adults attending church has doubled in the last decade to about 28% of the population. So if you're a boomer in Sweden, you are not going to church, and you've never gone to church. In fact, you're kind of embarrassed by Christianity. But what a lot of scholars are saying is that what we're seeing kind of the failed promises of secularism for a younger generation that's now lived through global pandemic and is living through very unsettled times. And I see it in my own young adult children, right? Like as a Gen Xer, I was probably one of the last generations to imbibe the promise, like if you go to university and get a good degree, you can buy a house, you'll have a pension, you'll have an easy life. Not easy, but you know what I mean? Like all of those promises, those benchmarks. And what I see in my own adult children is they don't believe any of that. Like they'll laugh out loud if you say that. Like those promises are no longer true. And those were promises of a secular society, right? Like if you work hard, get a good education, the state will also help take care of you. All of those things are failing. And what many scholars are saying, there's at least an openness now to kind of those deeper meaning questions that include spirituality. Not that everyone will exercise that through Christianity. Some people will do New Age or whatever. But there's a greater openness that's being documented in the younger generations that I find fascinating. But one of the things that's important to note is that secular 3 means that we're living in a time where a lot of the assumptions we grew up with no longer hold. And I'll tell you a fun little story from my commute home last summer. And so as I mentioned, we moved from the North Shore a few years ago to Bowen Island. A lot of people think Bowen is like one of technically it's a Gulf island, but not like Salt Spring or whatever. It's a 17-minute ferry ride from West Vancouver, right? So tons of us live on Bowen and work in Vancouver. But I have to say, or it's a 7-minute water taxi ride. I have to say that the ferry ride home every night is just so lovely to let go of work and stress and that kind of thing. When the weather is good, I sit on the top deck of the Queen of Capilano here, and you can always tell tourists from locals, because locals are on their phone, or I'm on my laptop, even though like the beauty of nature is all around us, and the tourists are at the railing, right, with taking pictures. So I was sitting with my laptop open, working, doing one of the things that I simply delight in doing, and that is eavesdropping on conversations. It's one of my favorite things. I just love listening in, being kind of nosy. And there was 4 adults who had clearly come up with their car. I take transit, so I was on earlier. They parked their car and they came up to the top deck. And they were standing by the rail taking pictures, tourists. But I was eavesdropping a conversation, and it sounded like the one couple were familiar with, they were talking about the route that they took and how bad the traffic was in the Lions Gate. And I thought, they sound local. So I puzzled out, this is a local couple entertaining friends from out of province doing a day trip to Bowen. Happens all the time. And the local couple, I don't know what their faith convictions were, but partway across, I mean, it is a gorgeous trip across, right? The local couple said, wow, isn't this beautiful? And their friends, who I figured out after listening were from Ottawa, said, yeah, it's so beautiful. And then, not knowing the faith convictions of the locals, they said to their friends, doesn't it just make you wonder kind of my ears picked up a little bit. They said, wonder like, what's behind all of this? I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And the couple from Ottawa said, no, not at all. It's just beautiful. I thought, oh, it's so interesting. And why is it so interesting? Within, you probably don't know or even care about this, but within our own like Reformed Presbyterian heritage, there are certain default assumptions. When we read John Calvin, who is the founder of the Presbyterian tradition, when we read his major work, which is called The Institutes of the Christian Religion, he has a beautiful phrase to describe nature. He says it's the theater, like going to see a play, it's the theater of divine glory. It's one of my favorite phrases. Like, so you're standing up on a mountain here looking out at the Salmon Arm, and Calvin would say, this is like God's putting on a show for you. Isn't it awesome? Like, it's a really beautiful, appreciative way for a bit of a dour European man from the 16th century to describe nature, the theater of divine glory. He also says this that I think reflects the 16th century and not 2026 or 2025 in this case. He says this. He says it's absolutely impossible, can't be done, that a human being could look at the natural world and not consider its creator, is the direct quote. Like, it's not actually possible for a human being to look at the mountains I saw this morning covered in snow and Salmon Arm and not think, wow, like, there must be a God behind this. But in 2025 or 2025-6 British Columbia, it's entirely possible, right? Just like the couple who said, no, it's just beautiful. Now, I'm not trying to be mean to that couple on the ferry. What I'm saying is they're the norm now, right? So when it comes to those of us who are following Jesus, we have certain assumptions that our neighbors no longer hold in common with us. And if we're expecting our neighbors to hold those things in common, we're just going to get frustrated, right? And so it's an invitation for us more to kind of have a posture of curiosity and openness with our neighbors to see where we might actually find that consensus. Now, I mentioned that the book that earlier, Leaving Christianity, looked at the census data in 2011. And I do find it interesting to note the trends. So this is from the latest census in 2021. So 5 years old now, and we're about the halfway mark as we wait for the 2031 census. But what you see here across Canada, the percentage is the percentage of Canadians who told the federal government they identified as Christian. Now, in the brackets is how that is up or down over the last decade. And you'll be quick to note, all the arrows point down, right? So what we're seeing is that Canadians in general are identifying less with Christianity. And there are still parts of the country where it's a Christian majority identification. I mean, look at Newfoundland, Labrador, 82%, right? Nunavut, 74%. There are interesting parts here, like Quebec is 65%. A lot of people are surprised by that because of how secular Quebec is. But if you've ever lived in Quebec, you'll know that there are a lot of people who treat Roman Catholicism almost like an ethnic marker. Almost like I have a number of Jewish friends who say, oh, I'm Jewish. Oh, awesome. Like, do you go to synagogue? Oh, no, I don't go to synagogue, but I'm Jewish. It's an ethnic identity. And so there are a lot of Quebecois who would call themselves Catholic out of identity marker, but don't actually attend Mass. Because this, of course, the government simply asks you how you identify. There's no linkage between membership, attendance, anything like that. This is just how people self-identify. And you'll see British Columbia, 34% is the lowest in the country. And that has been true since 1871 in the first census. We have always had the smallest percentage of people in Canada. Now it's dropped, obviously, right? Even 10% in the last decade. And even places people think like Alberta, only 48%, right? So it kind of checks certain assumptions that we have. And you may be curious to say, well, what about like other religions.
Yes.
So the other religions is in the orange. I know it's a little hard to see, but I'll give you BC, for example. So the dark blue is no religion. So this is when the Canadian government says, what's your religious identity? And now, unlike in those settler days where people were kind of hesitant to say, now you can just say, I don't have any religion. And 52%, the majority of British Columbians tell the government, I have no religion. Then there's that 34% that say they're Christian, and 13.7 identify as belonging to other world religions. And that makes a lot of sense when you think of the Lower Mainland, those who adhere to the Sikh, what growing up we'll call the Sikh tradition, a Sikh tradition. Some Muslim, although the percentage of Muslims is quite small in BC compared to, say, Ontario. And so that's the kind of breakdown there. But you can see that with the dark blue at top, Yukon Territory and BC are the two areas of the country, again, West Coast, that have the dominant expression of religious identity being no religious tradition whatsoever. So that leaves us, at least in 2021, with 53% of Canadians saying they have a Christian identity. But of course, that's down 14% over the last decade, and that's down 24% from the 2001 census. So you can see some significant trends taking place. This next one you will not be able to make sense of. It's like an eye exam. But so sorry for that. But these are by cities, broken down by cities. And you'll see that the top 6 most secular cities in Canada are right here in British Columbia, with Nanaimo being the most secular city. But in number 6 is Kelowna. And some people would be surprised, number 5 is Abbotsford Mission, which you always think, isn't that like the Bible Belt? But it's changing. So Kamloops, closer to us, well, I guess it's a little bit closer, is the next one down, then Vancouver, then Victoria, and Nanaimo is the most secular with 30% of the population. Now, if you think, wow, why did I come out on Saturday just to be depressed by Ross? That's not the point at all. And I give concrete examples of that. So Nanaimo, I was just over at meeting with the pastor of our church there, St. Andrews Presbyterian, just like your own. It's a lovely congregation, and their pastor there is Jeremy Bell-Smith. And that's a congregation in Canada's most secular city that's growing. And they have had, I think, 7 young adults come to faith in their church in the last 3 or 4 years with zero background, with no Christian background, and be baptized. They've hired a member of their church to be a community chaplain, and he's organized a soccer league for kids who can't afford to play soccer, and I think they have 200 kids involved in that. Like, I go and the place is just, it's amazing. Now, you would recognize it. It's not dry ice and lasers and, like kind of worship. It looks and feels like a typical church. But God is doing something. Now, the percentage of people there versus the whole city, it's still small. It will still look like this. But what I'm saying is that as followers of Jesus, we can still have vibrant communities that we belong to. But we need to, I think, start letting go of those assumptions, like we're the dominant faith expression, or we're in charge, and like all of that has passed. But there are some really beautiful examples of Christian communities thriving despite all of these challenges. And what remains true as always, I remind my students of this because we have kind of a Protestant bias, is that as has always been the case in the history of Canada, when you say Christian, the majority of people are Roman Catholic in our country. So that's 56% of those who say they're Christian are Roman Catholic. And then it breaks down all over the place. Presbyterian 2%, same with Lutherans and Baptists, which surprises people because people always think, oh, Baptists are larger. Well, they often have fewer churches and larger churches, right? Anglican, United Church, both 6%. What's growing is the non-denominational. More and more churches that just have no denominational perspective or branding and that kind of thing. So with all of that, an invitation now just for you to reflect How have you been experiencing those changes in Christian identity and affiliation in your own life and in your church community? In other words, what I put up there, does that kind of jive? Does that match with your own experience of living here in Salmon Arm and British Columbia? What do you think?
Well, I grew up in Ontario.
Yeah.
My dad's Lebanese Catholic.
Right. Yeah.
I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic French school
Right.
in Toronto.
Yeah.
I always say that the Catholics do one thing right, and that's they have beautiful buildings.
Do you have beautiful buildings? Yeah, that's right. That's good. It's good.
But I don't know. I feel like it's. I was really surprised. Actually, it was my friend in high school who introduced me to. At the time, it was United Church.
Yeah.
I had slept over with her on a Saturday, and she's like, so Sunday, she's like, okay, my family's going to church, and I was freaked, and she was asking me if I wanted to come, and I was like, but I don't have anything to wear.
It's kind of like this is how I have to be at church.
Because I remember when we went to
yeah, right.
it was like your best, and and
that's right.
And
so
I'm like, she's fine. I'm just fine. Just whatever. Just come as you are. And I'm like, oh, but won't people be like looking down on you?
Yeah, right. So that's a change, right? In how casual and formal we are. Yeah.
And that's what really brought me to it, because I felt for the first time it wasn't about the appearance.
Yeah.
Because I felt that a lot, and I'm not dissing the whole Catholic thing, but that was my personal experience. It was it was very much a show.
Yes.
Right. And it was an identity. People took a lot of pride in saying they were Catholic.
Right. Yes.
And they did go to church every Sunday, but everything in between.
Yes, that's right. And we'll see some of that. One of the 14 churches I study in Vancouver was the Catholic Cathedral. So later on, when we have a look, there's some kind of particularities of the Catholic expression these days that's kind of interesting to note. But this sense of kind of more and more Canadians identifying as being secular without a religious tradition, does that kind of make sense when you think about your own families, about people you bump into here in the community, or is that not the case in Salmon Arm?
No, very much. I grew up on Vancouver Island, so none of what you're saying is shocking.
Yes, that's familiar.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But also, I mean, you can see the shift in when my sister's children got to be school age.
Right.
She took them out of Sunday school and put them in organized sports so they could learn values.
Interesting. Yes.
So,
yes. So that's a choice. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, and so in the next kind of half an hour, just before we break for lunch, because I know you're looking forward to that, we're just going to explore a little bit what our response then as followers of Jesus might look like. If this is kind of the default reality now, what does it mean to be faithful? How do we respond? And this is kind of the work that I do in mission studies to try and figure out what does it mean to build a Christian community in societies where there's not really the kind of endorsement that we received in the past. And I find it very interesting, like when I have my graduate students, for example, right now I have a number of them from Indonesia, who, when they talk about Christianity, they never assume that they will be in the majority. They always assume they're going to be in the minority, and sometimes a persecuted minority. If you know Indonesia, it's a Muslim majority country that for the most part from the media has okay relationships between Muslims and Christians, but I've heard stories from my students about how that is not always the case. And so I think part of it is us moving into a time where we don't have assumptions anymore about us necessarily being the majority. So what does that mean? In many ways, it means like relearning how to be a missionary in our own society. Someone who I like very much, who has been helpful for me and others, is named Leslie Newbegin. And Newbegin may be a new name for you. He was born in the early 20th century in England. He was raised in a Presbyterian family. And he was well educated, Oxford, Cambridge kind of education. And then he volunteered to go, not with the Presbyterians in England, but with the Church of Scotland as a missionary to India. And he went there in the 1930s. So he was kind of like the poster boy for what we used to think of as a missionary, right? Tall, white man, well-educated, going outside of Western world to tell others about Jesus. And in many ways, over 4 decades there, he did really well. He lived locally. He didn't live in a Western compound. He lived locally with people. He learned the local languages. He became a genuine scholar of Hinduism, which is the dominant religion where he was, and not kind of in like a slick kind of like, I want to learn it so I can tell them how it's all wrong. He learned it like to respect it as a religious expression in order to be able to say, okay, this is what you believe and here's what Christians believe, and invite you to follow Jesus. You know, like he was working within that culture. And then when he reached the end of his ministry there, he said, look, if this is going to work, you don't need more people like me. You need to lead your own church. So he created this really curious fusion of Anglicanism and Presbyterianism that still exists today. It's a member of the World Council of Churches. Actually, 2 of our recent graduates, one is now serving in Nova Scotia with the Presbyterian Church, came to us from the Church of South India. And so he helped create this new church. And then he retired. And I find it quite encouraging because it's a story of how God sometimes has the best stuff left for your retirement years. He retired to England. And of course he'd been back a little bit over the years, but not much. And when he finally got settled in, he was appalled at what had happened in Britain since he had been gone for 4 decades. No one went to church anymore. And he said the people he did find in church were so timid, they didn't want to talk about God to anyone else. This was the 70s, and so the presenting issue in the 70s was like faith and science. Like, how can you believe any of that stuff? And he found like Christians like just, I don't know what to say. And so he, both as a local minister, he was elected moderator of the Reformed Church in the UK, and he was a professor. He started to do work, and he said, well, the one thing God has trained me to do is to be a missionary in a place where no one or a very small number of people know about Jesus. So he said, like, I guess I could do that here in England. He thought, I never thought I'd do it in England, right? This is the country that sent me out to tell people about Jesus. So that's exactly what he did. He kind of kicked off this, what is called the missional church movement, and he was invited to Princeton Theological Seminary in New Jersey in 1984 to give a distinguished series of lectures that were published as Foolishness to the Greeks. And in that, he raised the question, he said, what if the reality is that we've now become missionaries not by going overseas, but right where we live in North America? And he said, I'm not a North American, but you are, so maybe you should do something with that. And there was a group there that picked up that challenge, and that became the missional church movement in North America, which is part of kind of the academic work that I do. And one of the things that Newbegin said is that the church is really important, even if it's a small contrast community, because it's 3 things. He said the church, even if you just have a very small church, first of all, it's a sign that church is visible in the community, pointing to God, pointing away from itself to God, right? So just like we laugh, that some churches have like really beautiful buildings, it's true. I know, but you and I travel places, I always notice churches, right? And I was driving through downtown with my 13-year-old recently, and we went past the Catholic Cathedral, and she said, Dad, that's a really beautiful church. And I said, it is a beautiful church. I've been inside, I've had some students from there. And she said, it really kind of stands out downtown, doesn't it? And I said, yeah, like, that's the point. It doesn't look like an office tower, right? Like, so we're a sign. Now, clearly, it's not just the building. It's the people, but we point, the church is visible in the world to invite people to say, I wonder what that's about. It's a sign pointing God. It's an instrument. God uses us in the church to do stuff, to bless our communities, our neighbors, and so forth, right? So we're the hands and feet of Christ. And then I really like his language of foretaste. Think about like appetizer. Or, I don't know, you're all very good, but in our house, we had turkey for New Year's, not Christmas. And I'm famous when the turkey comes out of the oven of kind of just gliding by and taking a little bit. And it drives my wife crazy, right? I'm just testing, right? That's like a foretaste. And the image here is that people might see something in the way we live and treat each other that gives them a little glimpse of heaven. I remember when I was a student minister in Toronto, and I was looking after a church north of Toronto, and I stopped in, and there was a new subdivision going up, and they had a show home, a model home, and I went inside because I was just killing time, and honestly I wanted to warm up. It was cold, and my little Manitoba plate truck, the heater was broken, so I was cold, and I was ahead of time for the meeting. So I went in, and the guy gave me the tour of the show home. And then at the end, as I was sitting by the fire, I looked out through the window, and it was just the one house they had built, and all the rest was farmland that they were going to put the subdivision in. And he said to me, it's hard to believe, but one day everything out there is going to look like everything in here. I thought, that's like foretaste, right? Like it's easy to be cynical in the church, but when we're at our best, the way we care for each other and treat each other is like a little glimpse of the world that's coming. And so foretaste is a really important thing. The folks who picked up that work included Daryl Gooder, who's been a mentor of mine, and really wants us to believe that when we talk about mission, it's not just one thing we do, but it's our whole engagement as disciples in the world. That we're participating with what God is doing in the world. So before lunch, I have a few questions just to kind of prime the pump for you on thinking about mission. And then when we come back from lunch, we'll spend a little time reflecting a bit on what that looks like based on some research I've done. But when you let's kick out some ideas here. When you think back over the past 5 years, what is the most effective form of, let's say, mission, like a best practice that St. Andrew's Church has used to reach people in the community? Can anyone think of like just one thing that you tried that you say, that actually worked okay. That seemed to, we may have tried other things that didn't work, but that one thing worked. Does anything come to mind? A program or a practice? Experiment of some kind.
They've been listening to me preach about the church not working as its default.
Right.
Trusting to the Spirit. So we haven't done a whole lot of outreach kind of things. We're trying to wait and listen for the Spirit's voice.
Yeah, good.
Well, we do have a reputation.
Yeah.
And a lot of newcomers. We talked about this earlier about how people are passing away, but we're replacing the numbers. And when people come to this church, they feel welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I call it they come and never leave.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is true.
Yeah. So we're very relational.
Yeah, very much.
We establish those relationships very early.
Yeah.
From the stranger coming in the door, we don't
Yeah.
hide timidity behind the bench.
Right.
We greet them with open arms.
That's so important. I felt that when I've read it in here as well. Did you have a...
Yeah, I'm just like saying, like, when I moved here from Surrey,
Yeah.
I didn't, like, there was no, like, recruitment.
Right.
I was, like, at St. No, what's it called? Salvation Army doing a practicum.
Yeah.
But I just looked at all the churches' names, and it had Presbyterian on the outside, but it's the same address as my mother's house.
Oh, nice.
So that's how I chose.
I hear stories like that all the time.
And
It's
that's how I chose
amazing.
this church, but it's like the best I have.
Yeah.
You know, I was just telling them one of your questions, like,
Yeah.
I come here for smiles,
Yeah.
interaction,
Yeah, fun.
social life, really.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's how I chose a church.
Yeah, that's
my
great.
mom's address.
That's a beautiful
But I made
example.
the best choice. I
Yeah, that's great. Did you have one here as well?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that it's visible,
Yeah.
but this church contributes to this community really a lot in our giving.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have our loony jar that people throw money in
Yeah.
that is used for
Yeah,
all kinds of things.
that's great.
We have a set, I mean, it's not in stone, but we
Yeah.
have a set list of community people that we support
It's great.
through our givings.
It's really important. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Good. So
And
we
you
can,
guys do the second harvest as well as help with the churches,
Right.
Bridge to Door. So,
yeah, that's good. That's good. Let's have a think on this one. Who is my neighbor? We know that that's an important question in Scripture. It leads to a famous parable. What is the most significant difference? Might be age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic, between the people who are part of St. Andrew's Church and those that you bump into or encounter on a daily basis in Salmon Arm. I'll give you a background on this. Often, but not always, if I'm preaching somewhere, I have an irrational fear of arriving late to church. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's just a preacher thing. So I always like to be, imagine I'm preaching in Langley or something. I live on Bowen Island. What if the ferry's late? So I always take like an early ferry, and I get like out to the neighbor, because what if the traffic is bad? These are my issues I'm putting on. Never mind. Okay. So I get to where I'm going to preach early, and I look for a coffee shop. Maybe a Tim Hortons or something. And I go over my sermon or do a little work for the college or whatever, and I know I'm close. But I also, over the years, have noticed by doing that practice, I look around, and over, say, 45 minutes or whatever, this coffee shop, I see who's coming and going in that neighborhood, and I take a mental snapshot of age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic, and so forth. And then I drive to the church, and I park my car, and I walk in, and as worship begins, I take a second mental snapshot, and I compare the two. And it's not a comparison like in a judgmental way or anything, it's just a curiosity. Does this group of Christians in this neighborhood, does it look anything like the neighborhood I've just spent time in? And sometimes there's really good reasons why there's a disconnect. People will say, we're primarily a commuter church. Very few people live in this neighborhood. Well, that explains things. But then I wonder, but what does this church have to do in this neighborhood then, right? That kind of thing. So when you think about St. Andrew's Church, what would be some significant differences from the rest of the community?
Well, I think there's I would say, maybe it's because I'm from the big city, but I actually think Salmon Arm is a church community still very much.
Yeah.
So even amongst the younger population.
Right.
They go to other churches though.
Sure.
There's a lot of bigger ones,
Yeah.
like Cornerstone is quite popular.
Right.
SCC, the
Yeah.
evangelical.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
but we're definitely like a smaller.
Right. Okay. That's good. That's good. Anyone else? Any thoughts on how there might be? So I'm hearing that church going might be something for all ages in Salmon Arm. Maybe your congregation doesn't reflect maybe the diversity in age in the same way necessarily. But are there other differences that you've noticed? I mean, one example I gave of this, I remember preaching in a church in South Vancouver, and literally 99.9% of the people that came into the coffee shop were Asian Canadian. And then I went to happen to be a Presbyterian church, and there were no Asian Canadians worshiping there. I thought, oh, that's really noticeable. Like that kind of thing, right? That's where you just think, wow, okay, so that's something, right? Yeah.
We might be a small congregation, but we share our church.
That's right.
And
yeah.
It just delights me to see how many little kids and teenagers
Isn't that great? Yeah.
attached to that church.
That really is.
Oh yeah.
I'll say something about that when I show you some research later on about churches sharing space and how healthy that is and how good that is. Great. Well, here's a partnership. You mentioned Second Harvest. Who are the partners in the wider community? They don't have to be faith-based, that St. Andrew's Church works with to achieve your mission. I would count St. Andrew's Hall as one of those partners because you support our Wednesday night soup ministry that we have with students, so thank you for that. Who are some of the other, we mentioned Second Harvest was mentioned as a food bank. I threw up Canadian Food Grains Bank because there are some churches that participate, and it's based in my hometown of Winnipeg, so I like to put that in. Are there other partnerships you can think of that you've worked with over the years here in Salmon Arm?
Always volunteered with the thrift shop.
Yeah, nice.
All kinds of people.
That's a great example. That's really good. So we would throw thrift shop up there.
That's what I found out when I moved here, is there's a lot of churches
Yeah.
and an abundance of volunteers, because when I did the 55 plus games, there was 1,500 of us.
Wow,
So that's a lot in the area.
that's
of
huge.
Volunteer.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's a real gift that we know would not necessarily be found in larger centers, right? Where volunteerism
I
is
find there's a
often-
huge retirement community here.
Right, yeah.
And that's why I'm not thriving in finding work.
Yeah,
But, yeah, like there's a lot of people giving their time here.
good. That's really good. I like that.
Another thing I've noticed is the churches here all work together a lot. Like,
That's
like we were
awesome.
talking about denominations
Mhm.
and stuff earlier. Like personally, I don't. For me, it's very much because of how I was raised, like
Yeah.
Catholic, and then like all the rest of the group.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's just kind of like one
Like,
big
I-
category.
I
Yeah.
cannot tell the difference.
No, that's right.
Um,
I think that's how many people